Good morning, Illini. Welcome back to Healthy Illini Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schrock, and we are kicking off a new semester, spring 2024. Hard to believe sometimes, but we're jumping right back into it. So welcome to our students who have returned, and we're glad to be with you. Glad you're here listening to us again. And today's topic is one that is just so important at all the time, but especially coming back to campus and getting back into the college setting is something that is really important to talk about. And I'm excited to have this conversation today. I'm joined today by four guests who are all very well versed in today's topic, and so I want to introduce them to you real quick and then jump right into it. First up, we have Nora Peterson. She is with the Women's Resources Center here at UIUC. She's the Associate Director of Prevention. Nora, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Also joined by Jaya Colasetti. She is with a group that's in the community. She's the Executive Director of Rape Advocacy, Counseling, and Education Services, otherwise known as RACES. Jaya, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
And then I have two students with us as well. First up is Sydney Turner. She is a program assistant with Women's Resources Center and is also a first-year consent and relationships education, also known as FICARE, facilitator. Sydney, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And also joined by Abby Simpson. She's another FICARE facilitator.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so, one of the things that I really enjoy in Healthy Illini is it gives me an opportunity to have discussion, have conversation about a wide range of topics. And some of those topics aren't super easy to discuss. They can be uncomfortable, they can be difficult to address, or really just kind of scary to say out loud. But for me, that's why this discussion is so important, because it gives an opportunity to put a voice, to put a human side to what can sometimes be technical conversations. And for me, I'm of the belief that knowledge breeds wisdom, and wisdom is power in every aspect of our lives. So today we're talking about one of those types of topics, and that is sexual assault. I say on a lot of episodes that we don't ever try and give all the information on any topic, but just an opportunity to think about it, to start the conversation, and give tools to continue that conversation. That's really what we're going to do today, because there's so much we could cover in the scope of sexual assault. But what I want to start off with is education, because that's really why we talk about any topic on this program, or just in anything that we do on campus, is trying to educate people, educate students, so they can make their own decisions and things like that. So for all of you in your prep work, you really kind of you started off with that. Why is education so important when it comes to sexual assault?
Well, I can jump in. I think this is such an important question, and for us at RACES, we start doing prevention education in kindergarten, right? So these conversations, it's really important that we're talking about healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. For the younger kids, thinking about how do they talk to someone if something feels like there's something wrong, or if they've already been harmed, right? That could happen very early on as well. And that's really important partially, so we're thinking about how do we reduce rates of sexual violence. Prevention work really should be focusing on reducing the risk of someone causing harm, right? I think that's often not how we talk about it, but that's the only effective way to talk about it. But then also thinking about, especially as we talk about older audiences, and certainly the folks who are working here on campus can speak to this, also thinking about what is the impact when we're supporting survivors, right? If you don't know how to respond and you have that person who reaches out and says, hey, this happened to me, we can't expect people to know how to respond unless we've actually provided them the tools to do so. And it makes a world of a difference if a survivor gets a supportive response when they first disclose versus if they're met with questions or other harmful ways of responding.
I think that's a really important what you said about, how we know to respond. If education is so important because you're trying to give the tools for the moment if something happens. Hopefully nothing does, and it's not just in sexual assault, but in anything, like before I sent my daughter off to college, I was like, this is how you change a tire, because, you don't want to try and have that conversation when there's a flat. You want to have the understanding. So when there is something that happens, you have that knowledge to fall back on. You have that level of understanding to make use of. And so that's why that education is so important. And that's really where FICARE comes in. Because FICARE is first year consent and relationships education. Great. What does that mean? So Sydney, Abby, if you could talk a little bit about what FICARE is and how it is utilized on campus.
Yeah. So at FICARE, we have a 2-hour workshop that is presented to all first year students. So freshmen, transfers, and We cover topics including like consent, bystander intervention, how alcohol and substances play into those things, as well as resources and supporting survivors. And Abby and I took the CARE class together, which is the class that Nora teaches that we all had to take in order to become FICARE facilitators. And we really dove into this topic a lot more. And I think because when you say like education is so important, that class and also doing FICARE has really showed us that, because at the end of the semester, we see how people's perspectives have been changed. And even in workshops, students come in and they like didn't know some of these things. They didn't know, at least I didn't know, that I could learn this like as an academic topic. I didn't know that I could have this as a job until I got to college. So for me, education has been like the most empowering thing that I started off with, like in this work. And yeah.
Yeah, I think personally for FICARE, I find the education aspect super important, especially these kinds of situations aren't really talked about super often, especially before college. So having an experience before college and not really knowing why you might feel a little icky about it, and then going into FICARE and learning that, oh, it might have been under the sexual assault umbrella, which is why I feel a little icky about that situation, and here's other resources that I can get help with. And I find that super important from the survivor's perspective, as well as like teaching people what misconduct looks like, what can like how it can happen, that it can happen to anyone of any identity, is really important to like validate those who might go through it, but also just give that information to those who are out and about, especially at the bars on campus. Those are super popular. And I think like bystander intervention is a super important aspect of that, because a lot of us don't really know how to jump into situations. I know I've seen situations where I'm like, that seemed a little weird, and I now have the tools to jump in and maybe like check out, are you okay? What's going on? And so I find that aspect super important with FICARE.
You all mentioned that it can impact anybody. And often when we think about sexual assault, we only think about the survivors. And we're going to get to survivors, and we're going to talk about that because that's really important, the survivor side of it, and talking about some tools there. We're going to get that in a moment. But before that, because you mentioned bystander effect is a huge thing, and that affects everybody. It's not we're not just talking survivors when we're talking about the tools to be understanding and prevention and things like that. Literally everyone on this campus has an opportunity to deal with bystander effect, and probably has been in situations already with bystander effect. Can you explain what that means? I real quick, because we're a short program. I know that's a huge topic that we could spend. I know the psychology classes spend like weeks on bystander effect in some of their curriculum. But if you could just give me kind of an idea of what that means, and what you're looking out for to be aware of if you find yourself in that situation.
Yeah, I can jump in. So bystander intervention is the strategy to intervene a situation when you're not the person directly involved. So either the person causing harm or the person being harmed. You're a third character in that scene. Bystander effect is this psychological phenomenon. Like you said, we hear a lot about it in psych classes. When the more people who are involved in a situation, the less responsibility we each feel to intervene. So when I think about that in my own life, I think about when I'm driving down the road and I see a car broken down on the side of the highway. There's literally, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of people driving by. I feel surely someone else is called. I don't feel that same level of responsibility. But when I'm driving down a country road, no one else is around, and I see someone on the side of the road needing help, I feel a different level of responsibility to jump in. I might also be feeling a little uncomfortable or a little afraid, but that level of responsibility is different. So that's the bystander effect.
And the problem with that is on the highway, you think surely someone will stop, and most people, myself included, think surely someone will stop, and then nobody stops.
Exactly. We're all thinking it.
We're all thinking it, but nobody's acting on it. So
exactly.
how does that mentality, it's pretty straightforward, but what's the danger there when you're talking about sexual assault with bystander intervention? How does that affect, and how do you overcome that, and what are some tools that you can utilize?
Absolutely. So the danger then is that no one does anything because we all assume someone is doing something. And a big part of that is education, like Sid and Abby were talking about, is recognizing that, oh, I might be experiencing this assumption. Maybe I should actually do something or say something. In FICARE, we spend a lot of time talking about different bystander intervention strategies. So We really want to make it clear that there's not just one right way to intervene. There's lots of different ways that we can all step up and do something if we're uncomfortable with what's going on or concerned about someone else's safety.
And I'm going to pause here for just a moment because we're talking about a lot of really complex ideas and complex issues, and we're just hitting on it saying there's a lot of tools, but we're not offering a lot of these tools in this podcast because we just don't have time to offer those tools. Each one could be its own podcast. So if you're listening and you're like, you know what, I want to know what that means, or I want to know about FICARE, pause it now and go to our bio. Because we have links for all these resources, and we have links where you can find out more. So if you're already staying and going, you know what, I want to know how to be more effective in the bystander intervention, or I want to practice consent, I want to find out what that means. That's something else we haven't talked about yet. Pause it and check that out. The other thing is I want to shift over to survivorship.
Can I one more point about bystander intervention?
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually think it's a perfect segue because what I've seen at a lot of campuses is they only teach bystander intervention, which is, again, as has already been discussed, really important. But what we know about sexual violence is most often it's happening in people's homes. It's happening with someone who is known to them. There might not be a bystander. And so as we switch to talking about supporting survivors, I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that bystander intervention is one tool in prevention, but we have to be addressing those root causes of sexual violence, right? The things that make it more likely for someone to enact that harm. Because, like I said, I'm very proud as a 2-time U of I alum that we don't just teach bystander intervention, but there are a lot of programs that's their sole focus. And then so for so many survivors who've been assaulted, when there wasn't someone to intervene, there's no training, there's no education on what could have been different. And that really comes down to the person who caused harm. How are we teaching those folks who are enacting that form of harm that they could do things differently?
And that actually calls back to what Abby said earlier, that this feels icky, but I don't know why. Mm-hmm. There are so many situations that could fall under that category. And again, you're right. Bystander intervention assumes a group or other people. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And so that's where so many of these things that FICARE does and talks about are so important. We can't cover them all, and I acknowledge that. And so that's why check the links, find out, because, consent's everywhere. No matter what the situation, consent plays a part. So practicing consent, those kinds of things. These are tools that can be taught, that can be learned, that you can find in the resources we have in the bio. So check those out. The other thing is we're gonna transition into survivorship. This is a hard topic to talk about in so many ways, but one of them is if someone has gone through a situation, it can bring up recurring feelings. It can bring flashbacks. It can bring all these types of things. If you are listening and something is bothering you and you need to talk to somebody, there is a 24/7 phone number you can call. It's confidential in the bio. Click on that, pause it, talk. We want to support through this program. We want to give you tools so you can find support in this. So please take advantage of that. But I want to acknowledge that if something comes up and it's feeling, you just want to talk about it, whether it's overwhelming or just something you want to talk about, please reach out. There are people that you can talk to that want to support you, that are there to support you. So just want to acknowledge that before we move on a little bit, because I do want to move to the other side of it, because there is a lot of talk about prevention, and rightfully so. There's a ton of talk about prevention, because prevention is, if you prevent, then we don't have to worry about the rest of it, which is great. But there are people that prevention didn't stop anything. And so there are survivors, and that's the side I want you all to talk about, because you all were very assertive in the importance of survivor support and the importance of resources for that. And as we transition from, the education conversation to specifically survivor conversation, we talked about how anyone can be impacted as far as like bystander and things like that. But there's truth that anyone can be impacted on the survivor side also. Would you want to share just a little bit about that before we jump into it?
Yeah, it's something that we touch on in FICARE pretty heavily, is that anyone can be impacted, anyone can have harm happen to them, and any identity can be the one that causes harm. There's not one particular kind or identity of person than other, but I do want to highlight that folks who are like gender queer or non-binary or trans do experience higher rates. So that's just a really important thing to talk about while we're talking about these different kinds of identities, as well as those who our people of color do also experience higher rates of this kind of thing happening, unfortunately. But it's really important to highlight that when talking about survivorship and when talking about who could be impacted. It really boils down to anyone can be impacted, regardless of what maybe statistics look like. And anyone is welcome to come into the Women's Resource Center or RAICES or other resources for help if they feel impacted by these kinds of topics.
I think another population that often gets overlooked and has some unique barriers are male survivors. I think so often we've so much of this work has come out of the work of women, especially women of color. That's where our movement started from. But then sometimes people don't see that there are so many men and boys who have or will experience sexual violence. And so making sure that these spaces, these resources are clearly available to folks of all genders is absolutely essential. And just to recognize that there might be some unique barriers if people are trying to access services that have never been presented as something that's available to them as well.
So can you share some knowledge on that support and just kind of talk about what's available and also how to seek it out and why it's so important to have those resources available?
I think that one thing that's important to point out is that supporting survivors in a different way than like education and care and all that we do is a form of prevention. Because we talked about that in the care class, like about how there's obviously like bystander intervention, which is like in the moment, and there's care, which is before it happens or after it happens for some people. But supporting survivors, if we all have the understanding that what happened to you was terrible and we want it to not happen again, then that in turn can create a culture of like no tolerance for this kind of thing. And so I think that's something that is important to know when it comes to supporting survivors, is that like that has helped, like I know like a lot of people who have talked about in care, like what has helped them like, get through their experience, like students who have like disclosed to me or things like that and said like, this shows me that I'm not alone. This shows me that, like assault and misconduct doesn't look just one way. It's not always that thing that you see on TV. And so this has helped me know that people care about this. People also believe that this is not right. Especially on this campus, that there is places like the WRC and places like RAICES in the community that all have this understanding that this is not okay. And at least in that helps survivors know that, what happened to them was wrong and that they don't have to prove that to other people.
And I want to jump in and say that survivorship and learning about it is important for everyone, regardless of being a survivor or not. One thing that we teach in care is how to respond when someone discloses to you that they've experienced some kind of misconduct. And I find that incredibly important since friends and like family are the first people that get disclosed to typically in these situations. So going over productive ways to have that conversation with the person while giving them the autonomy to like make their choices for themselves and pick what resources they want to use is incredibly important when talking about survivorship.
And I just want to add, based on what Abby's been adding, that the reason it's so important for people to be able to make their own choices is because to have something happen to your body, to your personhood that is against your wishes can feel incredibly disempowering. People feel out of control. And so as the supporters of survivors, we really want people to feel empowered again. We want to not give them back. We want to help create an environment where they can take that control back. And so letting them choose which resources, when they're going to use them, who they're going to tell can be a really powerful thing for someone on their healing journey. And while we, as members of the UIUC community, are so lucky to have RAICES, have on-campus resources, I also want to put out there that these are not things that are limited to our community. So if students know someone on another campus or know someone who's not a college student but is also facing these types of concerns, there are resources available and they will be linked below.
Yeah, we'll have some links on things that are obviously to our campus because we are based in UIUC, or University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, but we'll also have some national resources. Obviously, we have RAICES, which is a community resource. So yeah, and if I'm going to speak for all of you here for a moment, if someone's listening and they look at it, they're on another campus, but they're not sure, reach out to the resources we have here. we'll do our best to help you find the resources that are in your area. This is not a limited thing. We may not have the knowledge right off of the exact resources there, but we'll do our best to find them. And so I think I could speak for all of you to say that you would be willing to do that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the way that sexual violence impacts people is not unique to any community. And so certainly we can help start that conversation with folks if someone, they had a friend disclose, or they're just thinking about how can I be a better supporter if someone does disclose. Absolutely reach out. We're happy to have those conversations with people. And then if they would like something that's closer to them, help connect them to those resources. Because I think that sometimes it just feels so intimidating to even know where to start. And I think, other folks have already said, how important this is, but I just want to reinforce how simple it can be too. It really can be just listening, right? I think so often in conversations, we want to jump in and problem solve, right? If our friend tells us they have a problem, we want to be like, oh, here's what you should do. And we want to avoid the should, right? So we want to be able to say, let's take that step back and make sure that we're giving time and space for people to decide what's right for them. So being educated, going back to that piece of knowing what options are available, and that might be different from community to community. And again, that's where we can provide that referral. But so much of it is just saying, I'm here to support you in whatever way feels right for you.
And I think that's really important because as friends, when a friend is hurting, no matter what the situation is, you want to do something,
right? Because
there's a feeling of, if I'm not doing something, I'm not being helpful. It's not so much that you want to be like, I want to be the one to fix it. Sometimes it's just, I don't know what to do. And if I don't do anything, then I'm afraid that I'm being no help whatsoever. But that's not true.
Right.
Like you said, listening is a huge aspect of being a supporter, no matter what the situation.
And I think sometimes you actually have to challenge yourself to not try to do too much. It's not uncommon for survivors to not want to talk about their experience, sometimes for extended periods of time, could be years. Like for us, we see people who may have experienced sexual violence as a child who are coming to us when they're elderly. It has to be in that person's own time to decide what healing looks like and when and if they're ready to talk about it. Another piece of that is deciding who they talk about it to. I think especially, among college students, there might be that tendency, if you know that person's parent, to say, we have to talk to your parent. Well, maybe that parent is not going to be supportive. Maybe that person doesn't feel safe. So again, making sure we're saying, what does that person want? And that has to include deciding if they want to talk about it, when they want to talk about it, who they want to talk about it to, but also recognizing the fact that someone disclosing to you, if they've put that trust in you, that is huge in and of itself. And so just really respecting the courage it can take for someone to reach out. And making sure that we're providing that empowering environment for folks, just to be there for whatever that healing journey looks like, because it is totally different for every single person.
And that's what I was going to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we talk about a sexual assault incident, an event, they're all unique in some way. Every instance is different in some way, and then for every survivor, their path for healing is different in some way. And we need to acknowledge that, well, I was trained that this is what you should do, good tools, but may not be the exact right path for this person. And to respect that as a supporter of someone who is surviving is difficult, because we want to do things, but it's important to remember that you're right, it has to come in their time and their method and what works. What is the best path for them? I shouldn't say works, but what's the best path for them to take the next step?
And I would just stress too, the resources we're talking about are available to supporters too, right? So people may have a range of emotions, and hearing a disclosure from someone they care about, and the appropriate place to process that is with another resource, not with a survivor, right? So if someone discloses to me, I'm going to feel a lot of different things, but it's important not to put that back on the survivor, but to reach out for support myself. And again, the resources we're discussing are available for supporters as well.
And I think that's especially important for college students, because y'all are serving as de facto communities for each other while you're away from home. You're building this new life. Having a friend or someone share this with you can be really, really hard, and thinking through, what are the steps that I should do? How do I process how I'm feeling? Like Jaya said, all of the resources that are for survivors are for you too.
I'm going to jump in real fast. It's really important to talk about this too. A lot of times you won't know if someone's a survivor. Right. They don't disclose for years, like Jaya said. And it's really important to be aware of how we talk to people even if we don't know they're survivors. So what kind of language we're using, if there's any victim blaming in our language, it's really important to like look at that now before you even know that someone's a survivor. So you're creating that safe space before something unsafe has happened or that you know of it, which can be really good for a survivor to have around them, even if they don't disclose that they're a survivor. So I want to put that in there.
Yeah, and going off that, kind of like what I was saying earlier, that in turn, like if we, that's what is so powerful about FICARE is that we kind of teach like a little bit about all of the topics that we've mentioned today. Obviously, there's so much more that we could talk about. But when we all like learn what that like culture of respect and culture of consent looks like, then in turn, we're all using that survivor-centered language. We're all using, the right strategies that we should be using to let people know, even if they haven't disclosed to us, even if they are not survivors, even if they're not directly involved with this work that we all do, that this is like, it's not okay to do these types of things. And it's important to understand more and to keep learning about it because like that's what we stress in FICARE too, even as people who, do this as a job, we're still learning. We're still always like, we're not experts on these things. Yeah.
You've all led exactly where I wanted to go with this a little bit, but it ties back to the education piece, how important that is, even for, the survivor side of it, because like you said, understanding language and things like that. And for me, I'll speak my own, there are times in my life in a lot of situations where I want to be a supporter, I want to be something, but I've said something that I had no idea carried a different meaning for somebody. And so then I was actually saying something that was hurtful or cause some conflict internally. And then because of that, if an event happens, they're not as likely to come to me because I've already shown myself to be somebody who may or may not understand. And that not because I'm callous to it, not because I was trying to be intentional, but because I just didn't understand. So that education gives you a chance to learn. The other thing you said, which I really wanted to kind of throw out there, is that you are all what I would consider experts in the field compared to where I am. But I think you would all say that it's always difficult when you talk to a survivor because you're trying to navigate a very unique situation, correct?
Yes, and so I think, yes, we all should always be learning, right? If you ever feel like you're done learning, then come on. We always can learn more. But I also want to make sure it's clear because I think a lot of survivors don't reach out for support because they're concerned about the impact on others. We are choosing to do this work because we believe that survivors deserve support, and we all have been trained to make sure that we are taking the steps to take care of ourselves. So I just want to reinforce of like, yes, it can be difficult, but we're very intentional. I can say that confidently in terms of the way we deal with things at races. And I know from working with the WRC that we're very intentional about making sure we're thinking about how do we create resilience among staff to make sure that we are able to provide support for people when they need it, right? And we certainly don't want people to be concerned about the impact on the people who are choosing. Again, we're choosing to do this work because we believe it's important. We are well prepared to support people whenever they need it.
Nothing like a real-time example of what I was talking about in that my intention in saying that was that to show that you still have things that you all feel like you need to learn and you're still learning, which what my point was to say that somebody who feels like they don't have the answers, that's normal because you are all, what I would consider experts and you don't have all the answers. I stated it poorly, unintentionally, and in a way could have been sounded like it was undermining and so what I'm saying is that, education is so important because I learned something just now, which is huge. And so reaching out and trying to educate and trying to learn is a big part of being a supporter in this and reaching out to people who do have the expertise, who do have the training, who are choosing to educate themselves in this is a huge part.
I actually appreciate that opportunity though, because I think that's an unstated barrier that often doesn't get addressed because so often people have internalized so much responsibility, have so many concerns about others. And we see this with folks of all ages. I will say, especially with the children that we work with, that there's so much concern about how it's going to impact their parents, how it's going to impact their siblings, how it's going to impact other people in their lives, that they don't ask for help because they're worried about others. And I think it's important to have that conversation because I can guarantee you there are people who are going to listen to this who've had that same internal dialogue with themselves of, this is hard for me, but I don't want to put this on someone else. And I just think it's important to have that opportunity to clarify. It's not putting it on someone else. when you're reaching out for a resource that is designed specifically to provide that support, and to reassure folks that we're set up specifically to make sure that the people who are, whether it's, the staff and volunteers who are answering our hotline 24 hours a day, they have that training, they have that support to make sure we can be there 100% for people in a way that's healthy for our staff and volunteers, but also to make sure that we're aware, right, that there's so many barriers for people to reach out, and they don't need to worry about us too, right? We're doing this for a reason because they deserve that support.
We are running short on time because, again, this is a huge topic and we can't possibly fit it all in. Before we close, you talked about reaching out. I want to give an opportunity. Somebody's listening and they see the links in the bio or whatever, but I do want you to talk about if somebody wants to reach out to RAISS, Women's Resource Center, or FICARE, how do they do that? What are the options there, and what are the ways they can get a hold of you?
I would say a really great place to go first is the WeCare website, wecare.illinois.edu. Especially for students on this campus, it's a really great place to go because it will give you options for what you need, like whether you want to talk to somebody, whether you want to support a friend, or whether you just don't know what to do at all. And it'll have all of the confidential resources like the RAISS hotline and more information about other community resources and other places on campus outside of the Women's Resources Center that can offer support. And so, that has more information about all of the things you've been talking about today, how to get involved in FICARE as well, or other prevention efforts. I think that's a really great place to go first, especially because it can kind of cater to your needs.
And I wish we had specified this earlier, but just to say, we've been saying the name Women's Resources Center, or WRC, a lot. We serve all members of our campus community. It's not just women. And so if anyone of any identity is looking for support here on campus, they are very welcome in our space to use our services, attend our programs. We also recognize that because of that name, some people might not feel comfortable coming to our spaces. So we have confidential advisors in our office who are specifically trained to respond to survivors, to provide them with information about their rights and resources and what's available to them that can meet students elsewhere. So if they would prefer to meet outside of the WRC, they're very welcome to do that. And their contact information is on the WeCare website, like Sid mentioned.
Yeah, the WeCare website has all of these resources. It really is a great tool. And again, just to keep in mind that there are confidential forms of support both on and off campus that are available to folks of all genders, whether someone's a survivor or supporter, they just want to learn more. There is help available 24 hours a day.
And building off of what Jaya had been talking about before we started doing our sign off, just to say, if anyone wants to talk, if anyone is thinking through a situation that made them feel uncomfortable, like Abby mentioned earlier, maybe they're not sure it rises to the level of criminal sexual assault, or they're processing, they're very welcome to come use the services. They're encouraged. There isn't a hierarchy of trauma, right? Everyone who needs support should have support, and we're here.
Well, I really appreciate talking to you all today, and just the perspective and the expertise and the natural flow of what you're talking about, giving that human voice. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate being part of the program. So Nora, Jaya, Sydney, Abby, I just want to say thank you.
Thanks for having us.
As we kick off another semester, there's so many things that are going through students' minds with schedules, the social activities, looking at probably internships already for the summer if you haven't started that already. There's a lot of things that are on our plates as students and as staff here on campus as we start the spring semester. But there are some topics that are definitely need to be talked about and need to be addressed, and sexual assault is one of them. Unfortunately, it's here, it's everywhere, and it's something that is not going away soon. And we're working on that, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, and resources that need to be known of for support and for education. So if you heard anything today, if you're listening to it and something struck a chord and you want to know more, or you find yourself in a position where you need to reach out to somebody and you haven't, or you need more support, whatever it may be, please contact the resources we have in the bio. Contact us here at Healthy Illini. We want to walk with you. We want to support you. We want to get you the tools for wherever you are in your journey, and whatever questions you have, we want to help you get those answers. But thank you for joining us today. You're on a personal journey no matter where you are in it. You are important and you matter. Your health and wellness are important and matter, and we're here to keep you well to excel. So go have a great week, Illini. Let us know how you're doing, and we'll catch you next time on Healthy Illini.